how to pass your CIMA case study examination for the OCS exam, going through the pre-seen information for the November 2025 to February 2026 for the case study example of SumTrix. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by OCS tutor Dan from Astranti, and we're going to walk and talk you through all the things we picked up on going through those pre-seen materials. But Dan, feel free to introduce yourself, my friend.
Well, hello. So I'm Dan. I work as part of the content team at Stranti, so helping to create a lot of the case study course materials, and I also work as one of the OCS tutors for Astranti. So it's been a bit of a busy period as we're kind of nearing the first instalment of the current OCS exam.
Exactly, Dan. Well, I mean, there's plenty to go through, plenty to go through. But what caught your eye going through it, first of all? Where do you want to kick us off for the insights to help the students ahead of their case study exam?
Yeah, I think the first thing that struck me, which I suppose is probably not that helpful for OCS students, is just how interesting this particular company is. It can be a little bit luck of the draw as to whether you get an interesting company or not. So I think within the team, I think the MCS and the SCS tutors, I feel, got a slightly rawer deal this time around. I thought SumTrix is a company that produces freestyle and touring skis, and as someone who doesn't ski much but has been once or twice, I thought this was a really interesting company. There is so much that we could say about this, but I think one of the things that jumped out really, right from the start of the pre-scene, was the way the SumTrix company was born. So it's a company that was born out of passion rather than primarily profit. So the three founders are themselves quite high-level freestyle skiers, and they basically started the company because they loved freestyle skiing. And so I think that kind of little detail can make a difference to particularly some of the values of the company, particularly because it's 10 years on. It's still not the biggest company in the world, although it's been growing quite a bit. And the fact that it's born out of that passion means that there's a very high emphasis on quality. And so because right from the start, they wanted to make really high quality niche skis. I think that's one of the things that's really important to bear in mind when you're looking at questions in the OCS, particularly questions that will ask you about non-financial implications, for example, of making a particular decision and having those values of the company in mind. Bearing in mind, it's a company that's born out of passion. They want to make really high quality. There's a sense in which the quality of the product is almost as important to them as whether they actually make a profit. So that, I think, is a really essential detail. This is not a mass production company that's trying to make loads and loads of products, make that kind of, I don't know, small profit margin and just increase the amount of profit of products that they make. It's a company that's really crafting their skis very, very carefully. So I thought that was one thing that jumped out quite early in the pre-scene, actually.
Definitely. And we've got the different products as well. So they sell the accessories, bespoke skis on there. And then we've got the other interesting area about the different revenue streams. So they've talked about actually touring ski markets. And as a non-skier myself, I've done it a couple of times, I gave it a go, not my thing. But what caught your eye from the sort of different revenue streams? And you can see it in the figures as well. We're given the breakdowns of all the different sort of costing behind it, the different areas of there. And bear in mind, they don't actually make the accessories. They buy them in and put the brand on it as well. So what sort of, stuck out to you from those sort of things?
So I think what jumped out is I think one of the things that jumped out was actually how well the company is doing, actually, relatively speaking. This isn't a company that's plateauing, it's not flatlining, it's not going down. And that's important because actually one of the key details in the pre-scene is the fact that the ski industry is growing. So that's a sign of a healthy company. If the industry as a whole is growing and the company's profits are growing, that's a healthy sign. So I think that was one of the things that jumped out. They only branched out, so their background really, and the bread and butter, is freestyle skis, which for those of us who are not experts in skis, which is all of us on this call, that skis really where you're doing kind of acrobatic tricks and so on. You're using kind of the equivalent of skate parks, but on ski slopes. That's really what they are. What they bring as kind of their background, their expertise, and that's really what's generating most of their revenue, most of their profit still. But they did launch not freestyle skis, touring skis a few years ago, which is
Yeah.
skis basically that you're using to just you use them to go uphill as well as downhill. So the idea being you're not restricted to a ski resort. You can
Mm.
attach it's like special grippy skins to the bottom of the ski to go up the hill, and then you take them off, and then you can ski down in the way that you would usually go down a ski run. And so they've expanded into that. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, if my memory serves me correctly, and it's been going well. So they've started launching this new range, these touring skis, and it's going pretty well. And if you look at the figures in terms of the forecast profits and so on for their touring skis versus their freestyle skis. Obviously, freestyle, that's still giving you the most of the profit. But they've been doing really well on the touring skis as well, and they're projecting to sell a good amount. So it's an increasing amount, and I think that's one of the key things in terms of company health.
Yeah.
So it's not just that they're selling a good proportion of touring skis; it's that the number of touring skis that they're selling is going up. And again, I think that comes back to the fact that it's a company that's operating within a niche. They're not trying to be like the big companies that make all different kinds of skis, all the way from downhill skis that most of us would tend to hire when we go skiing all the way through to cross country. They're focusing on two very specific kinds of skis.
Yeah.
And that's really actually helping them, because it also means they can actually charge more for each of the skis, because they're putting there's more expertise going into it. It says also that they're largely handmade, so that's something that
Yeah.
they can draw on. So they're able to make those probably slightly higher profit margins than those larger companies.
Mm.
I think another thing that jumps out really is that decision to bring accessories in rather than produce them. So their strategy as a company really is produce in-house what we are really good at, which I suppose that's a general business strategy, isn't it? You outsource the stuff that is less essential, you keep the stuff that is really core in-house.
Yeah.
And so that's what they do. They're producing the skis. They don't produce any of the accessories. They buy them in from suppliers with the SumTrix brand kind of slapped onto them, and then they sell them. And the thing that struck me with accessories is just how variable the profit margin is.
Mm.
So if you look at their skis, the beginner skis, decent profit margin; intermediate skis, slightly better profit margin; advanced skis, even better profit margin. That's what you'd expect. With the accessories, it really varies. So the poles haven't got that higher profit margin. It's kind of gross profit is 20% margin,
Yeah.
whereas the helmets, it's like 40%. And so it really varies. And so that you're kind of thinking possible exam situations. The fact that there is such a variation in profit margins on the accessories, you could imagine a question where they're going to ask you about a sales mix variance, for example, because you've got such different profit margins. If you get your sales proportions in a very different proportion to what you'd budgeted, that can make a pretty dramatic difference to the actual profit that you make overall. So I think that was one of the things that hit me as well, is just
Yeah.
that massive variation of profit margin within the accessories.
Mm. And we started to touch on some of the figures as well. I thought very interesting from the financial statements.
Mm.
Can link into working capital questions, also variances as well. And just having a look at the cash flows on there. So they've had a net increase in cash for the year. The
Yeah.
business is growing in terms of the balance sheet, profitable,
Yeah.
increasing as well. What were your sort of takes on the financial side of it? Maybe a variance or sort of working capital style question.
Yeah. So I think, what you mentioned there with the cash going up, I think is important. It's particularly important when you bear in mind that there were dividends paid during the year, and a pretty sizable investment in PPE as well. So you've
Mm.
got a company that has been able to increase their cash reserves despite a heavy amount of investment into new assets. So I think that's a sign of real financial health that you're. A few things I think that I'd pick up from the financial statements. I think you mentioned working capital. I think that's
Yeah.
really, really important to mention. So obviously your pre-scene doesn't give you the working capital ratios. But what we tend to do in our pre-scene analysis videos, and what I would suggest that you do yourself if you don't have access to our pre-scene analysis videos, is to calculate some of those ratios yourself, because they give you a much better idea of what's going on than just the brute figures. And what we're seeing, if we're calculating the working capital ratios, what we find is actually a working capital cycle that's quite probably not for the industry as a whole, but in terms of managing your working capital, it's quite high inventory days, so kind of
Mm.
about 71 over this year. Quite high payable days, so it means that they've got good terms with their suppliers. They're taking a while to pay them, but the overall working capital cycle is around about 35, which means that it takes quite a while for the company to convert their inventory into cash. And that's something to bear in mind, which I think is particularly important because one of the things we see in the pre-scene is that production happens all year round, but sales is a seasonal thing.
Mm.
And so managing working capital and managing cash flow is going to be particularly important for SumTrix. And I think there's a mention of the finance director, or is it the chief financial officer? I'm not sure which way, off the top of my head, can't remember which way around they phrased it.
Yeah.
One of the things that he has really sought to do is to try and put them in a good cash position.
Mm.
And I think that's a really important thing because when you look at the liquidity of SumTrix, it's not awful, but it's not that high. And I think things like liquidity, things like good cash flow management, working capital management are really important for a company that is doing all year round production, but seasonal sales. Because you can just imagine how the cash gets pumped into paying the suppliers, producing all of these skis, and you're getting halfway through the summer and you're thinking it's still a few months before we actually get to sell any of these. And so I could imagine some questions on working capital management coming up and cash flow
Yeah.
management. Another thing when it comes to ratios that I think is interesting, perhaps it's partly to do with it being a smaller company. It's not a listed company. The gearing ratios are pretty healthy. So if you're going for the standard way of calculating gearing, so debt, long-term debt over long-term debt plus equity, so around about 26%, that suggests there's a good potential for being able to get to invest by using debt. So
Yeah.
their gearing's gone down from one year to another, and so that suggests that if SumTrix need to do a major investment, which hint hint they might have to because they're looking to expand into North America, then financing that with bank loans or so on could be a viable option because they've not actually got that much tied up in debt really in their financial statements.
Yeah, exactly. And guys, if you'd like access to those analysis videos Dan's mentioned, I can link them down below. So feel free to check them out. We've touched on the financial side of things, Dan. I'm looking at the sort of mission and market dynamics. I mean, if we take it here from the mission, they've said our responsibility towards a more sustainable future. Another
Mm.
key sort of topic area. They've also got technology in there, climate change, and of course, we're dealing with an industry which involves snow, and they've talked about actually pumping snow onto the slopes to make sure people can ski. What other sort of non-financial areas of the syllabus
Mm.
or things that you picked up on in the pre-scene materials that you go, oh, that was quite interesting?
Yeah, I think the sustainability and climate change, I think, is massive, and they kind of give that to you on a plate a little bit in the pre-scene because they say in terms of the industry as a whole, climate change is massive because what you're getting is shorter ski seasons. I mean, this is something I experienced myself when I went skiing last time, talking to the place where I was hiring the skis, and the guy said he's looking to sell the business because he thinks within 10 years he might not have a business anymore. And so
Mm.
that's a real risk that ski companies in the real world are facing. And so because it's highlighted in the pre-scene in particular, I think when you see something particularly emphasized in the pre-scene, it can be a bit of a clue. Now, it doesn't mean what they're going to do is throw you a really long-term strategic question of what should we do to mitigate that risk. This is the OCS, we're talking about the operational side of things. But it does mean that you could imagine a question where they bring an element of risk into it, where they say, oh, well, we've had ski seasons are getting shorter. And so we've done a little bit of risk analysis and we've come up with these different probabilities in terms of what our sales might be like next year. And it may be that you need to then start applying some minimax, maximax criteria. It could be that you need to look at a decision tree based on different probabilities. So you could see how climate could come into the risk side of things. Climate and sustainability again, so that is really part of the mission and the values of SumTrix. So if we're talking about non-financial reasons to make a decision, so if you've got, for example, they're suggesting a new product, or they're suggesting a way of manufacturing the products that's slightly different, and they're asking you to evaluate the financial and the non-financial implications. You've got to look at sustainability as
Mm,
part of the non-financial. So let's say they say, well, we found a cheaper supplier, but that supplier is in a completely different country, and it's going to cost less to go with that supplier, but the carbon footprint is going to be much higher.
mm,
Those are kinds of things that are they're non-financial factors in the evaluation, but you need to take those into account because particularly for a company like SumTrix, where their mission is to be sustainable,
yeah.
it's not just that it's a nice thing to be sustainable, and you're almost in the exam writing companies should be sustainable, so they do this. It's actually a core part of the company. It's a you could say it's a critical success factor because they state we want to be sustainable. If they operate in a way that isn't sustainable, they're actually failing in their mission. That's going to lead to reputational damage. So sustainability, I think, is a huge one. Another non-financial one, I think, would be innovation, research and development. So you can see that it's a company that really put a lot of work and a lot of effort into research and making sure that they're crafting products and developing products to really high standards, looking to innovate. And so I think that emphasis on innovation, I think, is that could be something that could come up quite easily from a, obviously it all trickles down into financial,
Mm,
but at the point where you're assessing, should we go for this, should we go for that? Whether, yeah, make actually remembering that one of the real bedrocks of the company is to invest in innovation and so on, I think is definitely a
yeah.
big thing.
Exactly, and it goes without saying, come exam day, you've just got to be thinking on your toes, and that's where it's going to show up a student who has really understood the pre-seen details versus someone who's just sort of had a little flick through. And especially when I was reading it through, I thought, you're a finance officer, you've got a variety of different roles, preparation of management information, decision making on there, preparation of financial statements. They are gearing into a few different areas. But Dan,
Mm.
are there any other key things from the pre-seen materials that we haven't got on record that you wouldn't be able to sleep tonight if it could help a student out to get them that pass?
I think a few things. So I think a bit of low-hanging fruit would be, I think there are at least two or three areas in the pre-scene that make me think that a particular scenario could come up quite easily in the exam. One of those is they make it quite clear that they're exploring North American expansion opportunities. I would, I don't wear a hat, luckily, because otherwise I might be forced to eat it, but I would eat my hat if I wore one, if there wasn't at least one variant in the exam that really played on that. So that needs to be expanding into a new market where you don't have as much experience. And you can think of all of the operational questions that could flow out of that in terms of, oh, we've been doing it for the last 6 months. Performance hasn't been as great as we thought. Variance analysis question, or oh, we're looking to change the way we might produce the products for the North American range. Might it make sense to adopt a different kind of costing in order to take that into account? Maybe they're investing in further automation. And so let's change the way that we do the costing side of stuff. So I think that would be one. Another thing is the articles at the end of the pre-scene can often be a little bit of a clue as to some of the emphases in that might come up in the exam. So there was mention of accessibility. So there was a whole interview about paraskiing and the idea of developing paraskis. Now, maybe that's the kind of thing that could come up where you think, okay, well, we're developing para skis. They need to be highly customized. This is something that SumTrix can do well. They have a custom range of skis, but that has implications for how you do things like costing and budgeting, because you can't just do your standard. It's not as easy to just do absorption costing when you're not really too sure exactly where the costs are going to go for each of the skis.
Yeah.
So I think that could be another thing. Smart sensors in skis as well. You could imagine a scenario where they bring up the development of an app. So they put smart sensors in skis, and you've got an app in order to be able to track your metrics and how well you're skiing and what you can improve on. Digital costing could come into that. So how do you cost for a digital product? And apparently in the last examiner's report, that was an area that a lot of students struggled with, because I think a lot of students probably become quite familiar with the costing approach for manufacturing a physical product. But your costing for a digital product is quite different because it's basically lots of upfront costs and very few ongoing costs. And so make sure you brush up on your knowledge of costing for digital products. I think could be there's potentially a bit of a clue in one of the articles that there might be something to do with digital cost or costing for a digital product in some way or another.
Absolutely fantastic, Dan. But I can sense the students now going through. Got to write that. Got to write that down. Well, guys, I've put all of Dan and Astranti's details in the description below, so feel free to get in touch with the team on there. We just want to wish you all the best for your exam. Any other final best wishes or words of wisdom, Dan, to help a student get that pass?
I think a massive good luck, I think would be the big one, and I think we've been through a whole number of different areas that could come up. But I think one thing I would want to reiterate is the importance of practicing in the lead up to the exam, because you could have all of the knowledge of potential issues that could come up if you've not spent any time actually practicing questions. So going through mock exams that are based on the current pre-scene. So Astranti would provide a number of those. If you've not had a chance to actually practice applying that knowledge, then you're going to find it much more tricky on exam day, because you could dream up all of these ways that a question could happen, but you've not actually practiced actually putting that into practice. So practice in the lead up to the exam. Doing mocks could be I think is probably the single most helpful way of preparing for the exam.
Absolutely, Dan. And guys, I'll link those mocks down below in the description for you to check out. Best of luck with your exam, and we'll see you on the other side when you get your pass. So thank you very much.